1 year had passed since the traffic stop that changed so many lives. Chief Raymond Thompson stood before the city council, presenting his annual report on the police department. The numbers told a remarkable story. Since implementing our reforms, the chief reported, we've seen a 40% reduction in use of force incidents. Community complaints have dropped by 35%. And perhaps most importantly, trust in our police department has increased significantly, particularly among communities of color. The council members reviewed the data. The body camera program had proven invaluable, creating accountability for both officers and citizens. The Civilian Oversight Board had reviewed dozens of complaints and recommended policy changes that improved community relations. The bias training program, developed in partnership with Colonel Park, had been completed by every officer in the department. But the chief knew numbers only told part of the story. The real changes were harder to measure. They showed up in the daily interactions between officers and citizens. They showed up in the way officers approached their work. Sergeant Lisa Chen had become a leader in this cultural shift. As the head of the community policing unit, she trained new officers in a different approach to law enforcement. Her unit focused on building relationships with community members rather than simply responding to calls. When people trust you, they work with you, Chen told her officers during a training session. When they fear you, they avoid you. We can't keep communities safe if people are afraid to talk to us. One of her officers, a rookie named James Walsh, raised his hand. But Sergeant, what if we're too soft? What if criminals take advantage of us being nice? Chen smiled. She got this question often. Being respectful isn't being soft. Being fair isn't being weak. In fact, it takes more strength to de-escalate a situation than to dominate it. And you know what? When you treat people with respect, they're more likely to comply. They're more likely to trust you when something serious happens. She shared statistics showing that her community policing unit had some of the highest arrest rates in the department, along with the lowest complaint rates. Good policing and respectful policing weren't opposites. They worked together. Chen's success had earned her recognition beyond the local department. She had been invited to speak at law enforcement conferences across the country. She told her story openly, how she had witnessed misconduct and stayed silent, how speaking up had cost her some friendships but saved her integrity, and how the culture of policing needed to change. The blue wall of silence protects bad officers and hurts good ones, she said in one conference speech. When we protect officers who abuse their power, we make all officers look bad. When we hold each other accountable, we show the public that we take our oath seriously. After her speeches, young officers would approach her. Many of them shared stories of witnessing questionable behavior and not knowing what to do. Chen always gave them the same advice: document it, report it, and remember why you became a cop in the first place. Min-Jun Park's life had transformed in ways he never anticipated. He had been promoted to full colonel, with General Williams citing his leadership both on the base and in the community. But Min-Jun's impact extended far beyond his military rank. The training program he developed had been adopted by police departments in 3 states. He traveled frequently, teaching officers about leadership, dignity, and the importance of treating every person with respect. He drew on his military experience to show how discipline and accountability could coexist with compassion and understanding. In one training session, an officer challenged him. "Sir, with respect, you're coming at this from the outside. You've never walked in our shoes. You don't know what it's like to be a cop." Min-Jun nodded. "You're right. I've never been a police officer, but I have been a leader responsible for young people's lives in high-stress situations. I've had to make split-second decisions with incomplete information. I understand the challenges you face." He paused, then continued. "But I've also been on the receiving end of discriminatory policing. I know what it feels like to be treated as a threat when you're just trying to live your life. And that perspective is valuable too. If you only listen to people who have the same experiences as you, you'll never grow." The officer seemed to consider this. After the session, he approached Min-Jun privately. "Colonel, I apologize for my tone earlier. You made me think about things differently." "That's all I ask," Min-Jun replied. "Just be willing to think differently, to question your assumptions, to see people as individuals rather than categories." Sarah Park had channeled her experience into action as well. She had established a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement. She believed that diversity in police departments was essential for building trust with diverse communities. "We need officers who look like the communities they serve," Sarah explained at the Scholarship Fund's launch event. "We need officers who understand different cultures and experiences. We need officers who can build bridges instead of walls." The fund had awarded scholarships to 15 students in its first year. One recipient, a young woman named Destiny, had written Sarah a letter. "Because of your scholarship, I can afford to go to the police academy. My dream is to be the kind of officer who makes my community feel safe, not scared. Thank you for believing in people like me." Sarah kept that letter on her desk at home. On difficult days, when she remembered the fear of that traffic stop, when she worried about her children's safety, she would read Destiny's letter. It reminded her that change was possible, that hope was justified. Emma and David were growing up. They were 13 and 11 now. The traffic stop was no longer the traumatic event that defined their childhood, but it had shaped them. They understood injustice in a way their peers didn't. They spoke up when they saw unfairness. They asked questions about bias and discrimination in their classes. Emma had written an essay for school about her experience. Her teacher had been so impressed that she entered it in a state competition. Emma won second place. The essay was titled "The Night I Learned About Courage." In it, Emma wrote, "My dad could have stayed quiet that night. It would have been easier, but he taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. He showed me that you don't stay quiet when you see injustice, even when speaking up is scary." Min-Jun had cried when he read his daughter's essay. He realized that while the traffic stop had traumatized his children in some ways, it had also taught them important lessons. They had seen their father stand up for what was right. They had seen him turn a negative experience into positive change, and they were carrying those lessons forward. Derek Mitchell's journey continued. He had spoken at over 20 police academies and departments in the past year. His presentations were always difficult. He had to relive his failures, face the judgment of fellow officers, and admit to his mistakes over and over again. But it was working. Instructors reported that Mitchell's presentations had a profound impact on cadets and officers. Hearing from someone who had actually engaged in discriminatory policing, who had lost everything because of it, was more powerful than any theoretical lecture could be. Mitchell had also participated in several of Min-Jun's training sessions. The first time they worked together was awkward. Mitchell spoke first, sharing his story and his failures. Then Min-Jun spoke, sharing his experience as the victim of Mitchell's behavior. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable, but that discomfort was the point. Officers in the audience saw both sides. They heard from the officer who had failed and the citizen who had been harmed. They couldn't dismiss either perspective. After one joint presentation, a veteran officer approached them. "I've been a cop for 20 years, he said. "And I've done stops like the one you described, Mitchell. I never thought of it as racial profiling. I thought I was just being thorough, being careful. But listening to you both, I realize I've been making the same mistakes. I need to do better." Mitchell shook the officer's hand, recognizing it as the first step. "You're ahead of where I was." Mitchell's relationship with the Park family remained complicated. They weren't friends. The wounds were too deep for that. But there was a working relationship built on a shared goal, preventing what happened to them from happening to others. Emma still felt uncomfortable around Mitchell. She probably always would, but she told her father once, "I'm glad he's trying to be better. I hope it helps other kids not be as scared as I was." The Community Oversight Board had become an important institution. Made up of citizens from diverse backgrounds, the board reviewed all complaints against officers and made recommendations for policy changes. They had investigated 32 complaints in their first year, substantiating 12 of them and recommending discipline ranging from additional training to termination. One board member, Marcus Johnson, the young man who had spoken at the community forum, reflected on the board's work. "We're not anti-police. We're pro-accountability. We want good officers to be supported and bad officers to be held responsible. That's how you build trust." The board had also recommended changes to H. 6 months had passed since the night of the community forum. Derek Mitchell pulled his pickup truck into the parking lot of the grocery store. His body ached from another long day of construction work. His hands were rough and calloused. He was tired in a way he had never been tired as a police officer, but it was an honest tired. He was earning his paycheck with physical labor, not with the authority of a badge. There was something clean about that, even if it was hard. As he walked through the parking lot, Derek noticed an older woman struggling to load groceries into her car. His instinct was to help, but he hesitated. Would she recognize him? Would she want help from someone like him? He decided to offer anyway. "Ma'am, can I help you with those bags?" The woman looked at him gratefully. "Oh, thank you, young man. These old arms aren't what they used to be." As Derek loaded her groceries, she chatted cheerfully about her grandchildren. She didn't recognize him. To her, he was just a kind stranger helping out. It felt good to be anonymous, to be judged by his actions in that moment rather than by his past. Life had gotten smaller for Derek in some ways. He no longer had the respect that came with wearing a uniform. He no longer had the authority of a badge. But in other ways, life had gotten bigger. He was seeing things he had never noticed before. He was listening in ways he never had before. His marriage was slowly improving. Jennifer had stayed with him, though it hadn't been easy. They were in counseling together, working through the damage that his actions and attitudes had caused. She told him recently that she was seeing glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with years ago. That gave him hope. His children were adjusting too. At first, they had been confused and hurt by their father's fall from grace. But Derek had sat down with them and explained as best he could what he had done wrong and why he was trying to change. His 13-year-old daughter had asked him a question that haunted him. "Dad, were you mean to people because of how they looked?" He had wanted to deny it, to make excuses, but he forced himself to be honest. "Yes, sweetheart, I was, and I'm trying to understand why so I never do it again." Every Tuesday night, Derek attended the support group for people examining their racial biases. The group had become an important part of his life. It was a safe space where he could be honest about his struggles and his failures. In one recent session, the facilitator had asked everyone to share a moment when they first recognized their own bias. Derek had shared a memory from childhood. He was maybe 10 years old, and his father had pulled over a black man for a broken taillight. Derek watched from the front seat as his father questioned the man aggressively, searched his car without real cause, and made him wait on the side of the road for nearly an hour before letting him go with a warning. On the drive home, Derek had asked his father why he had been so suspicious of the man. His father's answer had been simple. "You have to be suspicious of people like that, son. That's how you stay safe." Derek had never questioned that lesson. He had absorbed it as truth, and he had carried it into his own career, treating it as wisdom rather than recognizing it as prejudice. "I'm trying to unlearn 25 years of bad lessons," Derek told the group. "Some days I think I'm making progress. Other days I catch myself having the same old thoughts and I realize how deep this goes." The facilitator nodded. "Awareness is progress, Derek. The fact that you can recognize those thoughts now means you're changing. You couldn't see them before. Now you can. That's growth." Derek was also doing something else that surprised everyone who knew him. He had started speaking to police academies and departments about bias in policing. At first, no one wanted to hear from him. He was the cautionary tale, the example of what not to do. But gradually, some forward-thinking departments realized that his perspective was valuable precisely because he had failed so publicly. One afternoon, Derek stood in front of a class of police cadets. They were young, eager, fresh-faced. They looked at him with curiosity and some judgment. They knew his story. "My name is Derek Mitchell," he began. 5 years ago, I was a police officer. I lost my job and my reputation because I engaged in racial profiling. I'm here to tell you how easy it is to become someone you never thought you'd be." He described his background, his father's influence, the culture of policing he had absorbed. He talked about all the small choices he had made that led to bigger failures. And then he showed them the video of Colonel Park's traffic stop. The cadets watched in uncomfortable silence. When it ended, Derek asked them, "How many of you think you could never do what I did in that video?" Most hands went up. "That's what I thought too," Derek said. "I didn't think of myself as a racist. I didn't think of myself as a bad cop. I thought I was just doing my job, keeping people safe, enforcing the law. But I was operating from biases I didn't even know I had." He walked among the cadets as he spoke. "Here's what I want you to understand. Bias isn't always conscious. Most of the time, it's not people actively choosing to discriminate. It's people acting on assumptions they don't even realize they're making. It's seeing a threat where there isn't one because of the color of someone's skin. It's treating people differently without even knowing you're doing it. One cadet raised her hand.
How do we avoid becoming like you?
The question was blunt, but Derek appreciated the honesty. Question everything. Question your assumptions. Question your instincts. Question what you were taught growing up. And most importantly, listen to the people in the communities you serve. When they tell you about their experiences with police, believe them. Don't get defensive. Don't make excuses. Just listen and learn. Another cadet asked, "Do you think you've changed? Or are you just saying the right things because you lost your job?" Derek paused. It was a fair question. I think about that a lot. Am I really different, or am I just playing a part? Here's what I know. I think differently now than I did a year ago. I see things I couldn't see before. I feel ashamed of things I used to feel justified doing. Is that real change? I hope so. But I also know that change is a process, not a destination. I have to keep working at it every day. After the class ended, a few cadets came up to talk to Derek privately. One young black man thanked him for his honesty. "My cousin was killed by police 3 years ago," he said quietly. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but the officer said he thought he had a weapon. He didn't, he just had a phone in his hand. Derek felt his throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." Did the officer face consequences? "No, it was ruled justified," the young man said. "But I still decided to become a cop. Because I want to be different. I want to show that police can serve and protect everyone fairly." Derek shook the young man's hand. "That takes courage. More courage than I ever had. Don't let the culture change you. Hold on to your ideals." Meanwhile, Min-Jun Park's life had taken on new dimensions. His work with the police department's training program was consuming more time than he had anticipated, but it felt important. He had developed a curriculum that drew on his military leadership experience and applied it to community policing. His key message was simple. In the military, we learn that leadership is about earning respect, not demanding it. It's about serving those under your command, not dominating them. The same principles apply to policing. Officers need to see themselves as servants of the community, not as warriors against it. The training program was getting attention from other departments. Min-Jun had been invited to speak at conferences and to help other communities develop similar programs. He was becoming a national voice on police reform, though he never sought that role. Sarah watched her husband navigate this new public life with a mix of pride and concern. "Are you sure you want to keep doing this?" she asked one evening. "You've already done so much. You don't owe the world anything more." Min-Jun considered her question. "I know I don't owe anyone anything, but I have an opportunity to make a difference. How can I walk away from that?" "Just don't forget about us," Sarah said, gesturing to where Emma and David were doing homework. "Don't forget that you have a family who needs you too." Min-Jun pulled Sarah close. "I could never forget that. You and the kids are my priority, always." Emma and David were doing better. The nightmares had stopped. They were no longer afraid every time they saw a police car. Slowly, their sense of safety was returning. But they had also learned lessons no children should have to learn so young. They had learned that the world wasn't always fair. They had learned that people would sometimes judge them unfairly. But they had also learned that speaking up against injustice was important, even when it was hard. As they walked through the produce section, Min-Jun heard a familiar voice. He turned and saw Derek Mitchell standing with his own family. Derek's wife was examining tomatoes while his teenage daughter pushed the shopping cart. His younger son was begging for cookies. For a moment, Min-Jun considered walking the other way. Seeing Derek brought back memories he had been trying to move past. But then he saw Emma and David spot Derek too. They recognized him. They tensed up, moving closer to their parents. Derek had seen them too. Min-Jun watched the conflict play out on D. 3 months had passed since the traffic stop that changed everything. Chief Thompson stood at the podium in the community center, looking out at the crowded room. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. Local news cameras lined the back of the room. This was the community forum he had promised. A chance for residents and police officers to talk honestly about the relationship between law enforcement and the community. A chance to start healing. "Thank you all for coming," Chief Thompson began. "Tonight is about listening. It's about understanding. And it's about finding ways to move forward together. We've had a difficult few months. But difficult moments can lead to important changes if we're willing to do the hard work. On the stage with the chief sat several people. Minjun Park sat in his army uniform. Sarah Park sat beside him. Officer Chen, now Sergeant Chen, sat on the other side. Several community leaders and activists filled the remaining chairs. A moderator from a local university would guide the discussion. The moderator, Professor Davis, started by asking Minjun to share his experience. Minjun had told this story many times now, but it never got easier. He described the traffic stop, his children's fear, the humiliation he felt. But he also emphasized what he hoped would come from it. "I didn't speak up for revenge," Minjun said. "I spoke up because I believe in this community. I believe we can do better. I've served this country for 20 years because I believe in American ideals of justice and equality. But those ideals only matter if we actually live them." The audience applauded. Many people had tears in their eyes. Then Professor Davis opened the floor for community members to share their experiences. A line formed at the microphone in the center aisle. The first person to speak was a young black man in his 20s. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he said. His voice was nervous but determined. "I want to thank Colonel Park for speaking up, because what happened to him has happened to me, multiple times." Marcus described being pulled over in his own neighborhood 3 times in 2 months. Each time I was asked where I was going, where I was coming from, what I was doing in the area. But I live there. I grew up there. It's my home. But I'm treated like I don't belong because I'm a young black man. He looked directly at the police officers in the room. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a college student. I work part-time at the library. I volunteer at the youth center. But when you see me, you don't see any of that. You just see a threat." When Marcus sat down, there was a heavy silence in the room. Then another person stood up to speak. A Hispanic woman approached the microphone. "My name is Rosa Martinez. I have 3 sons, teenagers, and I live in fear every time they leave the house." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I've taught them to be respectful, to comply with police, to keep their hands visible, to move slowly. I've taught them things that white parents don't have to teach their children. Because I know that one wrong move, one misunderstood gesture could be dangerous for them." She described an incident where her oldest son, Miguel, was stopped while walking home from school. He was wearing his high school jacket. He had his backpack. He was just walking home. But an officer stopped him, searched him, questioned him like he was a suspect in a crime. When I complained, I was told the officer was just doing his job. But why is it his job to harass a 16-year-old boy who's walking home from school? More people came forward with similar stories. An elderly Asian man described being told to go back to his country during a traffic stop, even though he had been an American citizen for 40 years. A Native American woman talked about being followed by police whenever she went shopping, as if her presence in a store was automatically suspicious. With each story, the weight in the room grew heavier. Some of the police officers looked uncomfortable. A few looked defensive, but others looked genuinely disturbed by what they were hearing. When there was a break in the testimonies, Professor Davis turned to Sergeant Chen. "Officer Chen, you witnessed the incident with Colonel Park. You've also worked alongside officers who engage in this type of behavior. Can you help us understand how this happens?" Chen took a deep breath. She knew this moment was coming, but it was still difficult. "I think the hardest thing for good officers to accept is that police departments have a culture problem. It's not just about a few bad officers. It's about a system that protects those bad officers and silences the good ones who try to speak up." She described her years of watching questionable stops and questionable searches. "I told myself I was just following orders. I told myself it wasn't my place to question more senior officers. But the truth is, I was scared. I was scared of being labeled as disloyal. I was scared of being excluded by my fellow officers. And because I stayed silent, people continued to be harmed." Chen's voice grew stronger. "When Colonel Park filed his complaint, I had a choice. I could stay silent again, or I could finally tell the truth. Telling the truth cost me some friendships. Some officers won't even speak to me now. But staying silent would have cost me something more important: my integrity." The room erupted in applause. Chen looked surprised and emotional. Chief Thompson spoke next. "Sergeant Chen represents the kind of officer we need more of. Officers who put their oath above their comfort. Officers who hold themselves and their colleagues accountable." He outlined the changes the department had implemented. Body cameras were now mandatory for all patrol officers. A new early warning system would flag officers who had patterns of complaints or concerning behavior. A civilian oversight board had been established to review all complaints against officers, and all officers were undergoing extensive training on implicit bias and de-escalation. But I'll be honest with you, the chief continued, policy changes alone won't fix this. We need a cultural change. We need officers who see themselves as part of the community, not separate from it. We need officers who understand that their job is to protect and serve everyone equally. Min Jun was asked what he hoped would come from all of this. He stood and addressed the room. I hope that my children won't grow up in a world where they're judged by the color of their skin instead of their character. I hope that families like the Johnsons and the Martinezes won't have to live in fear of the people who are supposed to protect them. He paused, looking around the room. But I also want to say something important. There are good police officers. Many of them. Officers like Sergeant Chen who risk their careers to do the right thing. Officers who serve their communities with honor and respect. We need to support those officers while holding accountable the ones who abuse their power. A white man in his 50s stood up in the audience. He looked angry. I'm a retired police officer, he said. And I think what's happening here is an attack on law enforcement. Derek Mitchell was just doing his job. He's being crucified for one mistake. The room tensed. Min Jun remained calm. Sir, with respect, this wasn't one mistake. Officer Mitchell had a pattern of behavior. He had previous complaints. And what he did wasn't just a mistake. It was a violation of my rights and my dignity. The retired officer wasn't satisfied. You people are always playing the race card. You want special treatment. We don't want special treatment, Sarah Park spoke up for the first time. She had been quiet most of the evening, but now she stood beside her husband. We want equal treatment. We want what everyone else gets, the benefit of the doubt, the presumption of innocence, basic respect. That's not special treatment. That's just human decency. Professor Davis intervened to keep the discussion productive. I think this exchange highlights something important. There are people who genuinely don't understand why this is a problem. They don't see the bias because they've never experienced it. That's why forums like this are so important. A young white woman raised her hand. When called on, she stood nervously. My name is Emily. I'm a high school teacher. And I have to admit, before I saw the video of Colonel Park's stop, I didn't really understand. I thought people were exaggerating when they talked about racial profiling. But watching that video opened my eyes. She looked at Min Jun. I'm sorry I didn't believe it before. I'm sorry it took seeing it on video for me to understand, and I want to know what I can do to help. Her question sparked a productive discussion. What could people who weren't directly affected by racial profiling do to help? How could they be allies? Min Jun offered an answer. Listen to people's experiences. Believe them when they tell you about discrimination they've faced. And use your voice and privilege to speak up. When you see injustice, don't stay silent. Change happens when people who aren't directly affected care enough to demand it. Toward the end of the forum, Chief Thompson made an announcement. Colonel Park has agreed to help us develop and deliver training for our officers. He'll be sharing his experience and his perspective as both a military leader and someone who has experienced discriminatory policing. We're grateful for his willingness to turn a negative experience into an opportunity for positive change. As the forum ended, people came up to thank Min Jun and Sarah. They came up to thank Sergeant Chen for... Derek Mitchell sat in his living room staring at the television. The news was playing the same video again. The video that had destroyed his life in less than a week. He saw himself on the screen, aggressive and hostile. He heard his own voice saying words he wished he could take back. He watched himself treating a decorated military officer like a criminal. When had he become this person? Mitchell was 43 years old. He had been a police officer for 15 years. Before that, he had grown up in a small town about 50 miles from where he now lived. His father had been the town sheriff. His grandfather had been a police officer before that. Law enforcement was in his blood. Mitchell's father, Robert, had taught him everything about being a cop. Robert Mitchell was old school. He believed in tough policing and showing who was in charge, in not taking any disrespect from anyone. He had trained Derek to see the world in simple terms, us versus them, good guys versus bad guys, order versus chaos. You can't show weakness, his father had told him many times. The moment you show weakness, you lose control. And if you lose control, someone gets hurt. Derek had taken those lessons to heart. He had never questioned them. Why would he? His father was a respected lawman. Everyone in their small town looked up to Robert Mitchell. But now, watching himself on television, Derek wondered if his father had been wrong about some things. His wife Jennifer walked into the room. She had been crying. She looked at Derek with confusion and disappointment in her eyes. "That's not you," she said quietly. "That's not the man I married." Derek didn't know what to say. Was it him? Or had he just been following patterns he learned without ever questioning them? "Jen, I was just doing my job," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Your job is to pull over families and terrorize them." Jennifer's voice cracked. "Your job is to make children cry in the back seat? That's what you think being a police officer means?" I thought he was..." Derek trailed off. What had he thought? That Colonel Park was a drug dealer? A criminal? Based on what? The color of his skin? The fact that he was driving a nice vehicle? Jennifer sat down on the couch, but not next to him. She kept distance between them. "Our children go to school with Asian kids. Black kids? Hispanic kids? How am I supposed to explain to them that their father treats people this way?" Derek felt anger flash through him. "You don't understand what it's like out there. The things I see every day. The dangers I face." "Colonel Park wasn't a danger," Jennifer shot back. "He was a father driving home with his family. But you saw a threat where there wasn't one." "Why, Derek? Why did you see him as a threat?" The question hung in the air. Derek didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but he didn't want to admit it. The next day, Derek met with his police union lawyer. The lawyer's name was Frank Peterson. He was experienced and expensive. The union was paying for his services. Frank laid out the situation bluntly. "Derek, I'm going to be straight with you. This case is bad. Really bad. The video evidence is clear. Officer Chen's testimony backs up everything in the video. And you have a history of complaints." "Those complaints were dismissed," Derek protested. "They were false accusations." Frank gave him a hard look. "Were they? Or did you just get lucky that there was no evidence?" Derek felt his face redden. "I've been a good officer for 15 years. "Then explain to me what I'm seeing in this video," Frank said, turning his laptop toward Derek. "Explain the people like you comment. Explain questioning why a colonel in the United States Army owns a nice vehicle. Explain the aggressive behavior toward a cooperative citizen." Derek watched the video again. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't as bad as it looked, but he couldn't, because it was exactly as bad as it looked. "They're recommending termination," Frank continued. "With your history and this video evidence, fighting it will be expensive and you'll probably lose. My advice, take the resignation offer. At least that way you leave with some dignity." Dignity? Derek almost laughed. There was no dignity left. That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to Jennifer, though she was turned away from him. He thought about his career. 15 years of service. He had made hundreds of arrests. He had helped people, hadn't he? But he also remembered other stops, other interactions, times when he had pulled someone over for what he told himself were legitimate reasons. But deep down, he knew the real reason was because they didn't look like they belonged in the neighborhood. Times when he had been harder on someone, more suspicious, more aggressive, because of assumptions he made based on appearance. He thought about a young black man he had arrested 3 years ago for possession of marijuana. The man had been sitting in his car in a parking lot. Derek had approached claiming he saw suspicious behavior. He had searched the car and found a small amount of marijuana in the glove compartment. The man claimed he didn't know it was there, that it must have been left by a friend. Derek hadn't believed him. He had arrested him, and the man now had a criminal record. But Derek remembered now that he had let a white college student go with just a warning a few months before that. Even though the student had marijuana in plain sight, Derek had told the kid to be more careful and sent him on his way. Why had he treated them differently? He knew the answer, even if he didn't want to admit it. The internal affairs investigation moved quickly. Investigators interviewed everyone who had worked with Mitchell. They reviewed his arrest records, his traffic stop records, his use of force reports. Patterns emerged that couldn't be ignored. Mitchell had pulled over people of color at a rate 3 times higher than white drivers. His traffic stops of minority drivers lasted longer on average. He was more likely to conduct searches. He wrote more tickets to minorities for minor violations that he let white drivers off with warnings for. The data was damning. It showed what Officer Chen and others had witnessed anecdotally. Derek Mitchell had been engaging in racial profiling for years. Chief Thompson presented the findings to Derek and his lawyer. Officer Mitchell, based on the evidence collected, I am recommending your termination from the police force. However, in consideration of your years of service, I'm willing to offer you the opportunity to resign instead. This offer expires in 48 hours. Derek looked at the report in front of him, page after page of statistics showing his bias, evidence he couldn't deny or explain away. I'll resign, he said quietly. Frank Peterson nodded. It was the right choice, even if it was a forced choice. When Derek got home, he went straight to his closet. He pulled out his uniform, his badge, his service weapon. He packed them all in a box. 15 years of his life going into a cardboard box. Jennifer found him sitting on the floor of the closet, the box beside him. She sat down next to him. What happens now? She asked. I don't know, Derek admitted. I've been a cop my whole adult life. It's all I know how to do. Maybe it's time to figure out who you are when you're not wearing that uniform, Jennifer said. Maybe that person will be better than the one I saw in that video. Derek looked at his wife. I don't know if I can change. This is how I was raised. This is what my father taught me. Your father was wrong about some things, Derek, and you were wrong to follow his example without questioning it. But you can still choose to be different going forward. You can still choose to learn and grow. The next morning, Derek submitted his resignation. He didn't make a statement. He didn't try to defend himself. He simply turned in his badge and gun and walked out of the police station for the last time. As he walked to his car, he saw Officer Chen in the parking lot. She was getting out of her patrol car, preparing for her shift. They made eye contact. Chen didn't look angry or triumphant. She just looked sad. Derek wanted to say something to her, maybe apologize, maybe thank her for having the integrity to tell the truth. But he couldn't find the words. He just nodded slightly and walked past. In the weeks that followed, Derek's life became unrecognizable. He took a job in construction, working for a friend who was willing to give him a chance despite everything. The work was hard and the pay was less than half what he had made as a police officer. His body ached at the end of every day. His reputation in the community was destroyed. When he went to the grocery store, people stared at him. Some whispered. A few confronted him directly, telling him he was a disgrace. His children came home from school reporting that their friends' parents didn't want them coming over anymore. Jennifer suggested they go to counseling together. Derek resisted at first, but eventually agreed. The counselor asked him difficult questions. Questions about how he saw other people. Questions about what he had been taught growing up. Questions about fear and power and control. In one session, the counselor asked, "When you pulled over Colonel Park, what did you see?" Derek thought about it. "I saw a black man in an expensive vehicle with out-of-state plates." "And what did you assume from that?" The counselor pressed. "Based on what evidence?" The counselor asked. "Based on nothing," Derek said quietly. "Based on my assumptions. Based on my biases." Saying it out loud, admitting it, felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders and being replaced by a different kind of weight. The weight. Officer Lisa Chen sat in her small apartment, staring at her television screen. The news was playing the video of the traffic stop over and over. Each time she watched it, she felt the same knot in her stomach. She had been a police officer for 8 years. Being a cop was all she had ever wanted to do. Her parents had immigrated from South Korea before she was born. They had worked hard to give her and her brother opportunities. They had taught her about service and duty. When she joined the police force, they had been so proud. But now, watching this video, she wondered what they would think. Would they be proud of her silence over the years? Or would they be disappointed that she had watched her partner engage in this behavior and said nothing? Her phone rang. It was the Internal Affairs office. They wanted to interview her again. This time, the interview would be formal and on the record. Chen knew what this meant. If she told the complete truth, she would be seen as a traitor by some of her fellow officers. The blue wall of silence was real. Officers who spoke against other officers often found themselves isolated, excluded, sometimes even threatened. But if she stayed silent or minimized what she had witnessed, she would be betraying everything she believed in. She would be part of the problem. Chen thought about her brother Jiwoo. He was a sergeant in the army, stationed overseas. He faced dangers every day, But he did it because he believed in something bigger than himself. He believed in protecting others and standing up for what was right. If Jiwoo could face enemy fire for his principles, surely she could face some angry colleagues for hers. The next morning, Chen walked into the Internal Affairs office. 2 investigators sat across from her at a table. A recording device was placed between them. Officer Chen, the lead investigator, began. "We need you to tell us everything you witnessed during the traffic stop of Colonel Park's vehicle. Don't leave anything out, and understand that this statement will be part of the official record." Chen took a deep breath. Then she began to talk. She told them about arriving at the scene and immediately sensing something was wrong. She described Mitchell's aggressive posture and hostile tone. She explained how she had checked the taillights and found them working perfectly. She recounted Mitchell's comment about people like you and his refusal to believe Colonel Park's identification. But then she went further. She told them about other incidents she had witnessed over the years. "There was a stop about 6 months ago," Chen said. "Officer Mitchell pulled over a young Hispanic man for allegedly failing to signal. The man was polite and cooperative, but Mitchell searched his entire vehicle, claiming he smelled marijuana. He found nothing. The man was late for work because of that stop. I watched it happen and said nothing. The investigators wrote everything down. Why didn't you report these incidents before?" one of them asked. Chen felt her face flush with shame. "Because I was scared. I was scared of being labeled a troublemaker. I was scared of losing the respect of my fellow officers. I told myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being too sensitive, but deep down I knew what I was seeing was wrong." "What changed?" the investigator asked. "Why are you speaking up now?" "Because Colonel Park didn't stay silent," Chen replied. "Because he had the courage to file a complaint even though it would have been easier to just drive away and forget about it. Because his children had to watch their father be humiliated for no reason. If I stay silent now, I'm part of that humiliation. I'm part of the problem." The interview lasted 2 hours. When it was over, Chen felt lighter somehow. She had finally told the truth. Whatever happened next, at least she could look at herself in the mirror. But she wasn't prepared for how quickly things would change. Within days, word had spread through the department that Chen had given a statement against Mitchell. Some officers stopped talking to her. In the locker room, conversations would stop when she entered. A few officers she thought were friends started avoiding her completely, but others approached her privately. To her surprise, 3 other officers came forward with their own stories about Mitchell's behavior. They had witnessed similar incidents but had been too afraid to speak up before. Chen's courage had given them courage. Meanwhile, outside the police station, the community was responding to the news story. A local civil rights organization organized a peaceful protest. They called for accountability and reform. They demanded that Officer Mitchell be fired, and that the department implement new policies to prevent racial profiling. On a Saturday morning, about 200 people gathered in front of the police station. They held signs that read "Badge or no badge, wrong is wrong, and protect and serve everyone," and "Justice for Colonel Park." Min Jun and Sarah attended the protest, though they hadn't organized it. When people saw them arrive, they began to cheer. Min Jun felt uncomfortable with the attention, but he also felt supported. A young black man approached Min Jun. He was maybe 20 years old, dressed in a college sweatshirt. "Colonel Park," the young man said, "I just want to thank you for speaking up. Last year I was stopped by police 3 times in 1 month. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just driving through my own neighborhood. But each time I was questioned, searched, made to feel like a criminal. I never reported it because I didn't think anyone would believe me." Min Jun shook the young man's hand. "I believe you. And your experiences matter just as much as mine." Throughout the morning, people came up to Min Jun and Sarah with similar stories. A Hispanic mother told them about her teenage son being stopped and harassed on his way to school. An elderly Asian man described being pulled over and told to go back to his country, even though he had lived in America for 50 years. Each story reinforced what Min Jun already knew. This wasn't just about him. This was about a pattern of behavior that affected entire communities. A local news crew was filming the protest. A reporter approached Min Jun for an interview. "Colonel Park, some people are saying you're overreacting. That this was just one bad interaction and you're making too big a deal out of it. What do you say to that?" Min Jun looked directly into the camera. "I would say that one incident of racial profiling is one too many. But this isn't about one incident. This is about a pattern. This is about a system that allows officers like Derek Mitchell to behave this way without consequences. I'm not asking for anything special. I'm just asking for what every American deserves, to be treated fairly and with respect by law enforcement. The reporter nodded. What do you hope will come from your complaint? I hope that Officer Mitchell will be held accountable for his actions, Min-jun said. But more than that, I hope the department will implement real changes. Better training on bias, more accountability measures, a culture that encourages good officers to speak up when they see wrongdoing. Because I know there are many good officers out there. I've met them. Officer Chen is one of them. We need to support the officers who want to do the right thing. Chief Thompson held a press conference that afternoon. He stood at a podium with several other police officials behind him. News cameras from multiple outlets were present. I want to address the incident involving Colonel Park and Officer Mitchell, the chief began. I have reviewed the video evidence and the statements from witnesses. I have also reviewed Officer Mitchell's history. I can confirm that Officer Mitchell has been placed on administrative leave pending the completion of our internal affairs investigation. Reporters shouted questions. Chief Thompson raised his hand for quiet. I also want to announce that we will be implementing new policies and training protocols to address bias in policing. We will be establishing a community oversight board that will review all complaints against officers. We will be requiring all patrol officers to wear body cameras within the next 6 months. And we will be conducting mandatory training on racial bias and community relations for all department personnel. More questions came from reporters. Chief Thompson, why did it take a viral video for these changes to happen? Why weren't they implemented after the previous complaints against Officer Mitchell? The chief's expression showed frustration, maybe even regret. That's a fair question. The honest answer is that we failed. We had warning signs and we didn't act strongly enough. That's on me as the leader of this department. But we're going to do better. We have to do better. At Fort Bragg, General Williams called Min-jun into his office. Colonel, I've been in contact with Chief Thompson. He seems committed to making real changes. But I want you to know that you have the full support of this command. If you need anything, if you face any retaliation or intimidation, you come directly to me. Thank you, sir, Min-jun said. I appreciate that. Min-jun thought about it. The idea of helping to train the officers who were supposed to protect his community appealed to him. Maybe he could make a real difference. I'd be willing to help, sir, Min-jun said, if it means this doesn't happen to other families. That evening, Sarah showed Min-jun something on her laptop. Look at this, she said. The video had been shared over 1 million times on social media. Comments came from all over the country. Min-jun Park woke up early the next morning. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Officer Mitchell's face. He heard the officer's voice saying, "People like you." He felt the humiliation of standing on the side of the highway while his children watched in fear. He got out of bed quietly, trying not to wake Sarah, but she was already awake. I didn't sleep much either, she said softly. They went downstairs together and sat at the kitchen table with coffee. The house was still quiet. The children were still asleep upstairs. Sarah took out her phone and opened the video she had recorded. They watched it together in silence. Seeing it again made Min-jun angry all over again. The video clearly showed everything. Mitchell's aggressive approach, his baseless accusations, his refusal to believe Min-jun's identification, his discriminatory comments. This is solid evidence, Sarah said. You can't watch this video and not see what was happening. Min-jun nodded. I'm going to the police station this morning. I'm going to file a formal complaint. Do you want me to come with you? Sarah asked. No, stay here with the kids. They need you right now. Emma was having nightmares last night. I heard her crying around 3 a.m. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She's 10 years old. She shouldn't have to deal with this. Neither of them should. I know, Min-jun said, taking her hand. That's why I have to do this. If I don't speak up, nothing will change, and this will keep happening to other families. After breakfast, Min-jun put on his army dress uniform. Every ribbon, every medal, every insignia was perfectly placed. If he was going to file this complaint, he was going to do it as Colonel Park, not just as a private citizen. The drive to the police station took 15 minutes. Min-jun had passed this building hundreds of times. He had always felt safe knowing these officers were protecting his community. Now he wasn't sure what to feel. He parked his vehicle and walked into the station. The desk sergeant looked up from his computer. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Min Jun's uniform and rank. "Colonel Park," the sergeant said, standing up. "What can I do for you, sir?" Min Jun was mildly surprised that the sergeant knew his name. "You know me?" "Yes, sir. You spoke at my daughter's school last year during Veterans Day. She's in the 5th grade. You talked about service and leadership. She still talks about it." Min Jun remembered that visit. It felt like a lifetime ago now. Back when he still believed that his uniform and his rank meant something. Back when he thought he would be treated with respect regardless of the color of his skin. "Sergeant, I need to file a formal complaint about a traffic stop that occurred yesterday evening on Highway 85, Min Jun said. The sergeant's expression changed from friendly to serious. "I see, let me get you the necessary forms. Can you tell me which officer was involved?" "Officer Derek Mitchell," Min Jun replied. The sergeant paused. Something flickered across his face. Recognition? Concern? He handed Min Jun a clipboard with several forms. "You can fill these out here, sir." "I'll let the chief know you're here." "The chief?" Min Jun asked Chief Thompson. He likes to be informed about any formal complaints immediately, especially ones involving his officers. 20 minutes later, Min Jun was sitting in Chief Raymond Thompson's office. The chief was an African-American man in his late 50s with gray hair and kind but serious eyes. The walls of his office were covered with commendations, photos with community members, and certificates from various law enforcement training programs. Chief Thompson shook Min Jun's hand firmly. "Colonel Park, thank you for coming in. The desk sergeant briefed me on why you're here. Before we begin, I want to say I'm sorry for whatever happened. Every person in this community deserves to be treated with respect by my officers." Min Jun was taken aback by the chief's direct approach. He had expected defensiveness, maybe even hostility. Instead, the chief seemed genuinely concerned. "I have a video of the entire interaction," Min Jun said, pulling out his phone. "My wife recorded it." Chief Thompson took the phone and watched the video from beginning to end. His expression grew darker with each passing minute. When the video finished, he set the phone down and sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. "This is unacceptable," the chief finally said. "This is not how my officers are trained to conduct traffic stops. This is not how they are supposed to treat members of this community." He pulled out a file from his desk drawer. "I need to be transparent with you, Colonel. This isn't the first complaint about Officer Mitchell. There have been 2 previous complaints about similar behavior. Both times, the complaints were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. It was his word against the complainant's word, and without video or other evidence, the department sided with the officer." Min Jun felt his anger rising. "So he's been doing this to other people? And nothing was done?" "I'll be honest with you," Chief Thompson said. "Those previous complaints bothered me. I had internal affairs interview Mitchell both times. I assigned him to additional training on bias and community relations. But without concrete evidence, my hands were tied. Police unions are powerful. I couldn't take strong action based on allegations alone." He tapped the phone. "But this changes everything. This video is clear evidence of discriminatory behavior and abuse of authority. With your permission, I'd like to use this video in a formal internal affairs investigation." "You have my permission," Min Jun said immediately. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Chief Thompson picked up his desk phone. "Send Officer Chen to my office immediately," he said to whoever answered. 5 minutes later, Officer Lisa Chen entered the office. She looked nervous when she saw Min Jun sitting there. "Officer Chen," Chief Thompson said, "Colonel Park is here to file a formal complaint about a traffic stop yesterday involving Officer Mitchell." "I understand you were also at the scene?" Chen glanced at Min Jun, then back at the chief. "Yes, sir, I was." "I need you to tell me exactly what you witnessed," the chief said, "and I need complete honesty. Your career depends on it." Chen took a deep breath. Min Jun could see the conflict on her face. He knew what she was going through. Speaking against a fellow officer was not easy. The police culture valued loyalty above almost everything else. "Sir," Chen began, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Officer Mitchell pulled over the Park family vehicle claiming there was a broken taillight. When I arrived at the scene and checked the vehicle, both taillights were functioning properly. There was no legitimate reason for the stop." Chief Thompson nodded, taking notes. "Continue." "Officer Mitchell was aggressive from the beginning. He questioned Colonel Park about the vehicle ownership in a manner that suggested he didn't believe the colonel was the legitimate owner. He made comments about people like you, which I interpreted as racially motivated. He conducted an unnecessary and aggressive pat-down. He questioned Colonel Park's military identification, suggesting it might be fake. Throughout the interaction, Officer Mitchell's behavior was confrontational and appeared to be based on racial profiling rather than any legitimate law enforcement concern. The room was silent when Chen finished. She had just ended her partnership with Mitchell. She had just potentially made herself an outcast among some of her fellow officers, but she had told the truth. "Thank you, Officer Chen," Chief Thompson said. "That took courage. Your honesty is noted and appreciated." After Chen left, the chief turned back to Minjun. "I'm going to be straight with you, Colonel. This is going to get complicated. Officer Mitchell has 15 years on the force. He has friends here. The police union will fight hard to protect him. But with this video evidence and Officer Chen's testimony, I have what I need to take action." "What kind of action?" Minjun asked. "I'm placing Mitchell on immediate administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation. I'll recommend termination if the investigation confirms what I saw in that video. I can't promise you a timeline, but I can promise you this will be taken seriously." Minjun nodded. "I also need to report this to my commanding officer at Fort Bragg. This incident affects military-civilian relations in this community." "I understand," Chief Thompson said. "In fact, I'd like to speak with your commanding officer as well. We need to rebuild trust between the police department and the military community." When Minjun left the police station an hour later, he felt exhausted but determined. This was just the beginning. He knew there would be challenges ahead. He knew some people would try to discredit him or claim he was overreacting, but he also knew he was doing the right thing. That afternoon, Minjun met with his commanding officer, General Marcus Williams. The general was a stern but fair man who commanded respect from everyone at Fort Bragg. Minjun stood at attention in the general's office and briefed him on what had happened. He showed the general the video. He explained his decision to file a formal complaint. "Thank you, sir," Minjun said. "I'm going to contact Chief Thompson myself," the general continued. "We have thousands of military personnel and their families living in this area. They need to know they'll be treated fairly by local law enforcement. This is a serious issue that affects military readiness, eh?" Officer Chen sat in her patrol car staring at the computer screen. She had run Minjun Park's information through the system. Everything came back clean. No warrants. No criminal record. No outstanding tickets. The vehicle registration was current and matched the driver's license perfectly. She looked up through her windshield at the scene unfolding in front of her. Mitchell had Minjun standing with his hands on the SUV. The colonel stood there with perfect posture, completely compliant, yet somehow dignified even in this humiliating situation. Chen had been a police officer for 8 years. She loved her job. She believed in protecting and serving her community. But moments like this made her question everything. She had seen Mitchell behave this way before. Always with people of color. Always with some excuse that barely made sense. She got out of her car and walked back toward Mitchell and Minjun. As she approached, she could hear Mitchell's voice getting louder and more aggressive. "So you claim you're some big-shot military officer?" Mitchell was saying. "Driving around in a fancy SUV? Where'd you really get the money for this vehicle? What do you really do for a living?" Minjun's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "As I've told you, I'm a colonel in the United States Army. I've served for 20 years. Right, Mitchell said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure that's true. You got any proof of that? Or is this just another story?" "I have my military identification card in my wallet," Minjun replied. "Would you like to see it?" "Oh, I'm sure you've got all kinds of fake IDs," Mitchell said. He pulled out Minjun's wallet and started going through it roughly, pulling out cards and tossing them onto the hood of the SUV. Chen's stomach twisted. This was wrong. This was so clearly wrong. She had to do something. "Mitchell," she said, trying to keep her voice professional. "I ran his information. Everything checks out. The vehicle is registered to him. There are no warrants or flags." Mitchell glared at her. "I don't need you to tell me how to do my job, Chen." Inside the SUV, Sarah was still recording. Her phone captured every word, every action. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to get out and stand beside her husband. She wanted to scream at this officer that he was treating a decorated military hero like a common criminal, but she knew that would only make things worse. "Mom," Emma whispered from the back seat. Her voice was small and frightened. "Why is that policeman being so mean to Dad?" Sarah turned to look at her daughter. Tears were streaming down Emma's face. David sat beside his sister, trying to be brave, but his eyes were wide with fear. "I don't know, baby," Sarah whispered back. "But Dad is handling it. Everything is going to be okay." But Sarah wasn't sure if that was true. She had watched the news. She had seen what happened to people who looked like her husband during traffic stops. Sometimes things didn't end okay. Sometimes things ended in tragedy. She kept her phone steady, making sure the camera captured everything. Outside, Mitchell had found Minjun's military ID card. He held it up to the light, examining it closely. The card clearly showed Minjun's photo, his rank as colonel and his assignment to Fort Bragg. "This could be fake," Mitchell said, though his voice held less certainty now. "Anyone can make a fake ID these days." "That is an official Department of Defense identification card," Minjun said firmly. "You can call Fort Bragg to verify my identity if you have any doubts." Officer Chen stepped closer and looked at the ID card. She recognized it immediately. Her brother was in the army. She knew what a real military ID looked like. This one was absolutely genuine. "Mitchell, that's real," she said quietly. "That's a legitimate military ID. He's telling the truth." Mitchell's face reddened even more. He seemed angry that his narrative was falling apart. "I still need to check him for weapons and contraband. This is standard procedure." "Standard procedure for what?" Chen asked, her voice firmer now. "What was the initial reason for the stop?" "Broken taillight," Mitchell snapped. "The taillights are working fine, Mitchell." "I checked them myself," Chen said. She could feel her courage building. She had stayed silent too many times before. Not this time. Mitchell ignored her and continued his aggressive pat-down of Minjun. His hands moved roughly over Minjun's clothing. It was clear this was about intimidation, not safety. Minjun closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about his father, who had immigrated to America from South Korea with nothing but hope and determination. His father had worked 3 jobs to give his family a better life. He had taught Minjun that America was a land of opportunity, a place where hard work and merit mattered more than the color of your skin. Minjun had believed that. He had dedicated his life to serving this country. He had missed birthdays and anniversaries. He had spent months away from his family in dangerous places. He had done all of this because he believed in America and what it represented. But right now, on this highway, those beliefs felt very distant. "Sir, I would like your badge number," Minjun said clearly, "and I would like to speak with your supervisor." Mitchell stepped back, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "I said I would like your badge number and the name of your supervisor," Minjun repeated. "I am going to file a formal complaint about this stop." "You're going to file a complaint?" Mitchell's voice rose. "You're the one who's being uncooperative. You're the one who's resisting." "I have not resisted anything," Minjun said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel now. "I have complied with every instruction you've given me. I have been respectful and polite. But you have not given me a legitimate reason for this stop, and your behavior has been inappropriate." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. This was the man she had married. A man of principle and courage. But she also knew that standing up to police officers could be dangerous, especially for men who looked like her husband. She kept recording, her hands steadier now. If something happened, at least there would be evidence. At least people would know the truth. Mitchell moved closer to Minjun again, invading his personal space. It was a classic intimidation tactic. "Are you threatening me? Because if you're threatening a police officer, I can arrest you right now." "I'm not threatening anyone," Minjun replied. "I'm exercising my rights as a citizen." Officer Chen had seen enough. She stepped between Mitchell and Minjun. "Mitchell, step back, now!" Mitchell looked at his partner in shock. "What did you say?" "I said step back," Chen repeated. "This stop is over. There's no violation here. You know it and I know it. Chen, you need to remember who's the senior officer here," Mitchell said, his voice low and threatening. "I'm also remembering my oath," Chen replied. "To protect and serve. Not to harass innocent people." The 2 officers stared at each other. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Min-jun stood very still, not wanting to do anything that might escalate the situation further. After what felt like forever, Mitchell took a step back. "Fine, have it your way." He threw Min-jun's license and registration onto the hood of the SUV. "You're free to go." Min-jun carefully gathered his documents. His hands were steady, but inside, adrenaline was coursing through his body. He had remained calm on the outside, but this encounter had taken its toll. As he reached for the door handle to get back into his vehicle, Sarah opened her door and stepped out. She couldn't stay silent any longer. "Officer," she said, looking directly at Mitchell, "I recorded this entire interaction. Every word, every action." Mitchell's face went pale, then red again. "You can't record me without my permission." "Actually, I can," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking slightly, but she stood her ground. "North Carolina is a one-party consent state, and we're on a public highway. I have every legal right to record this interaction." Officer Chen looked at Sarah and gave her the slightest nod. It was a small gesture, but it communicated volumes. It said, "Good, I'm glad you recorded this. I'm glad there will be evidence." Mitchell seemed to realize the situation had completely slipped out of his control. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. Now he just sounded worried. Min-jun opened the back door to check on his children. Emma was still crying softly. David looked up at his father with questions in his eyes that no 8-year-old should have to ask. "It's okay now," Min-jun said softly to his children. "We're going home." He got back into the driver's seat and started the engine. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Sarah got back into the passenger seat, still holding her phone. As they pulled back onto the highway, Min-jun looked in the rearview mirror. Officer Chen was standing by her patrol car, watching them drive away. Mitchell had already gotten back into his vehicle, probably hoping to leave as quickly as possible. For several minutes, nobody in the Park family spoke. The only sound was Emma's quiet sniffling from the back seat. Finally, David broke the silence. "Dad, did we do something wrong?" Min-jun's heart broke a little at that question. He took a deep breath before answering. "No, son, we didn't do anything wrong." "Then why did that policeman stop us?" David asked. "Why was he so angry?" "Sometimes," Min-jun began carefully, "people make decisions based on things that don't matter. Things like what someone looks like instead of who they really are." Emma spoke up from the back seat. The summer sun was beginning to set over Highway 85 in North Carolina. The road stretched long and straight through the countryside just outside Fort Bragg. Traffic was light on this Thursday evening in July. Most people were already home from work, sitting down for dinner with their families. Min-jun Park kept his eyes on the road as he drove his black Chevy Tahoe. His wife Sarah sat in the passenger seat, reading something on her phone. In the back seat, their 2 children were quiet. 10-year-old Emma was drawing in her sketchbook. 8-year-old David had his headphones on, watching a movie on his tablet. The Park family was driving home after a long weekend. They had spent 3 days visiting Sarah's parents in Atlanta. It had been a good trip. The kids got to play with their cousins. Sarah's mother had cooked all of Min-jun's favorite dishes, but now everyone was tired and ready to be home. Min-jun was tired too, but in a different way. He had just returned from a 6-month deployment overseas 2 weeks ago. He was a colonel in the United States Army. At 42 years old, he had served his country for 20 years. He had earned his rank through hard work, dedication, and sacrifice. Now he was looking forward to some quiet time at home with his family. "We should be home in about 30 minutes, Min-jun said to Sarah. She looked up from her phone and smiled. "Good. I know the kids are getting restless," she replied. Sarah was a doctor at the hospital near the military base. She had taken the week off to spend time with family. Tomorrow she would go back to work. Min-jun glanced in the rearview mirror. A police car had pulled onto the highway behind them. He thought nothing of it at first. He was driving exactly at the speed limit. His vehicle was in perfect condition. All his papers were current and in order, but then he saw the flashing lights. "Really?" Sarah said, turning to look behind them. What could this be about? Min-jun felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had experienced this before. Too many times, actually. He took a deep breath and put on his turn signal. Slowly and carefully he pulled the SUV onto the shoulder of the road. "Stay calm, everyone," he said to his family. "Keep your hands where the officer can see them. Don't make any sudden moves." Emma looked up from her drawing. "Dad, what's wrong?" Why are we being stopped? I don't know, sweetheart. But everything will be fine. Just stay quiet and let me handle this, Min-jun said in his calmest voice. The police car stopped behind them. Min-jun could see the officer sitting in his vehicle for what felt like a very long time. He knew the officer was probably running his license plate through the system. The plate would come back clean. The vehicle was registered in Min-jun's name. There were no warrants, no tickets, no problems. Finally, the officer got out of his car. Min-jun watched him in the side mirror. The officer was a white man, probably in his 40s. He had a thick build and walked with an aggressive stride. His hand rested on his gun belt as he approached. Min-jun rolled down his window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where the officer could see them. This was something he had learned to do years ago. It was a survival skill. The officer appeared at the window. His name tag read Mitchell. He looked at Min-jun with cold eyes. He didn't smile or offer any greeting. License and registration, Officer Mitchell demanded. His voice was sharp and unfriendly. Yes, sir, Min-jun replied politely. They're in my glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now. He moved slowly and deliberately. He opened the glove compartment and took out the registration. Then he reached for his wallet in the center console. His military ID was right there with his driver's license, but he decided to show just his driver's license first. Officer Mitchell took the documents and examined them. He looked at the license, then at Min-jun, then back at the license. His expression showed suspicion and doubt. This your vehicle? Mitchell asked, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it was. Yes, sir, it is. Min-jun answered calmly. Where are you coming from? Mitchell continued. We're returning from Atlanta. We were visiting family, Min-jun explained. Atlanta? That's a long way. What were you really doing there? Mitchell asked. The question felt like an accusation. Sarah shifted in her seat. Min-jun could sense her growing anger. He gently placed his hand on her knee, a silent signal to stay calm. As I said, officer, we were visiting my wife's parents. They live in Atlanta, Min-jun repeated, keeping his voice steady. Mitchell walked slowly around the vehicle, looking in the windows. He peered into the back seat where the children sat. Emma grabbed David's hand. Both children looked scared. When Mitchell returned to the driver's window, his attitude had become even more hostile. Step out of the vehicle, he ordered. May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer? Min-jun asked respectfully. He had every right to know the reason for the traffic stop. I said step out of the vehicle, Mitchell repeated, raising his voice. Don't make me ask again. Sarah's hand moved toward her phone. She had seen videos like this before. She knew what could happen. Quietly, she opened her camera app and started recording. She held the phone low, trying to be discreet. Min-jun looked at his wife. Their eyes met for just a moment. In that brief glance, they shared an understanding born from years of marriage. They both knew what was happening here. They had both experienced it before in different ways. Yes, sir, Min-jun said. He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly. I'm unbuckling my seatbelt now. I'm opening the door now. He narrated each movement clearly. This was another survival skill. Make sure the officer knows exactly what you're doing. Give them no reason to feel threatened. No reason to reach for their weapon. Min-jun stepped out of the vehicle. He was a tall man, 6 feet 1 inch, with a strong build maintained by years of military fitness standards. He stood straight with his shoulders back. Even in this difficult moment, his military bearing was evident. Officer Mitchell moved closer, invading Min-jun's personal space. Put your hands on the vehicle, he commanded. Officer, I'd like to know what violation I've committed, Min-jun said. He kept his voice calm but firm. He was not being aggressive or disrespectful. He was simply asserting his rights. You've got a broken taillight, Mitchell said, but his tone suggested he was making this up. Sir, I don't believe that's accurate. The vehicle was inspected 2 weeks ago. All lights were functioning properly, Min-jun replied. Are you arguing with me? Mitchell's face reddened.
Are you telling me I don't know what I saw?
Before Min-jun could respond, another police car pulled up. A second officer got out. This officer was Asian American, a woman in her 30s. Her name tag read Chen. Officer Chen approached and immediately seemed to assess the situation. She looked at Min-jun, at the family in the vehicle, and at her partner, Mitchell. Her expression showed concern. Everything okay here, Mitchell? She asked. Everything's fine, Chen. Just doing a routine traffic stop, Mitchell replied, but his tone was defensive. Officer Chen walked to the back of the SUV. She examined the taillights. Both lights were working perfectly. She caught Minjun's eye and gave a slight nod, confirming what he already knew. There was no broken taillight. There never had been. She walked back to where Mitchell stood with Minjun. "Mitchell, the lights look fine to me," she said quietly. Mitchell ignored her. He began patting down Minjun aggressively, his hands rough and invasive. "You carrying anything illegal? Any weapons? Any drugs?" "No, sir," Minjun replied. "I'm a colonel in the United States Army. I'm stationed at Fort Bragg." Mitchell laughed. It was not a friendly laugh. "Sure you are. And I'm a general. People like you always have some story. People like you." Those words hung in the air. Everyone heard them. Everyone understood what they meant. In the vehicle, Sarah's hands shook as she held her phone. She made sure the camera captured everything. Emma had started crying quietly. David hugged his sister, trying to comfort her even though he was scared too. Officer Chen stepped forward. "Mitchell, maybe we should—" "I've got this, Chen," Mitchell cut her off. "Why don't you go check if there are any warrants?" Chen hesitated. She looked like she wanted to say more, but Mitchell was her senior partner. She walked back to her patrol car, but she kept watching the situation closely. Minjun remained calm on the outside, but inside, his mind was racing. He had faced enemy fire overseas. He had made life-and-death decisions in combat. He had led soldiers through dangerous missions. But nothing made him feel as helpless as this moment. Here on an American highway, in the country he had served for 20 years, he was being treated like a criminal, and his children were watching it all happen,